Welcome back, champions. Thank you for joining us and continuing our distance learning experience. So, before we get started, I'd like to reiterate that our weekly newsletter comes out every single Monday. That newsletter does have links to our instructional videos and both the links to our hangouts for Tuesday and Wednesday, along with our work from today's lesson and some additional sheets for practice that we may have. You will send that work to my inbox, and I look forward to reviewing all of your efforts. Make sure that you show your work, try your best, and be confident throughout the entire lesson. So, let's get started. Welcome back, champions. So, in this video, we will be discussing solving multiplication stories using 3 easy steps. Let's begin. Step 1 instructs us to read story problem and determine what the story wants us to find. So, let's do that together. The first question reads like this. 5 students went to the movie theater. They each spent $7 on their tickets and $5 on their snacks. How much money did they spend all together? The second part of step 1 says determine what the story wants us to find. So we must reread to understand what the story problem wants us to find. So let's do that again. 5 students went to the movie theater. They each spent $7 on their tickets and $5 on their snacks. How much money did they spend altogether? When we read that multiplication story, we are understanding that this question is asking us how much money did they spend altogether. That is what the multiplication story wants us to find. How much money did they spend altogether? So let's go ahead and underline that information because it is very important to know what we are looking for, because when we know what we're looking for, then we know how to use the information that the multiplication story is giving us. So let's take a moment to underline the question. How much money did they spend altogether? Because that is the question that we are answering, and that question is asking us to find a total. Step 1 is complete. Let's go down and move to step 2. Step 2 says create an equation that represents the multiplication story. Use the variables from the multiplication story. Well, Miss Madden, how do we create an equation that represents the multiplication story? How do we know what the variables are? Well, we know these things because the story problem told us what these things are. When we read our story problem those first couple of times, we read that 5 students went to the movie theater. They each spent $7 on their tickets and $5 on their snacks. Those are the variables that we're going to use to find our total. Those variables are going to help us create an equation that represents the story problem. So, let's move on to that step. In every multiplication story that we will ever encounter, those multiplication stories will always have something that represents the groups, something that represents the and each, and it will be asking us to find a total. Every multiplication story will have these variables represented in the wording. But sometimes it's not always easy to spot the groups or the and each. So, something that can help us identify our variables will always be the language, the wording, and the story problem. In our multiplication story today, it says they each spent 7 on their tickets and 5 on their snacks. This sentence is giving us our and each. So, we want to highlight that information because it is very important. They each spent $7 on their tickets and $5 on their snacks. The and each is important information because the question is asking us to find the total that is spent all together amongst the friends. So we have to know how much each person spent on their food altogether. So in our and each, we are going to write $7 and $5 because they each spent 7 on their tickets and they each spent 5 on their snacks. let's find the groups. In our multiplication stories, the groups will always represent what is holding the in each, using the in each, framing the in each. The groups is always doing something with the in each. Always. So let's figure out which part has to do with the in each. 5 students went to the movie theaters. They each spent $7 on their snacks. They each spent $7 on their snacks. The they and the in each is talking about the 5 students. So our group must be the 5 students. So there we have a completed multiplication equation so we can actually find the total. We have all of the variables to find our altogether total, and at this point we have to solve the equation. So that brings us to step 3, solve equation using distributive property and to write out our complete answer. Let's do step 3 together. Miss Madden, there aren't any hard numbers in this equation. Why do we even need to use distributive property? Well, we can use distributive property in this equation because in order to find how much they spent altogether, we are going to use 2 different equations. Both of our equations will be modeled just like our equation that we've written here. Please take 30 seconds to think what numbers will be inside of the equation and why will we put those numbers in the equation. Pause the video here for 30 seconds and we will come back and talk about it. The easy way to model our multiplication story with distributive property is just thinking about what our variables are doing. So in our groups, there's only one number. Okay, so there will only be one number that we'll use for our groups. But in each, we have 2 different numbers. So we have to multiply one of those numbers to the groups, and we have to multiply the other number in our in each to the groups. So that's why we have 2 different equations. So inside of the parentheses, we will have groups times the in each for one of our numbers in the in each. And on the other side, we will have groups times the in each for the other side of our in each, for the other number. Let's go ahead and fill in our equation. Our equation is now modeled in the distributive property format. We have our groups represented in each of the parentheses because we want to know how much money each of the 5 friends spent. So we have to know how much did the 5 friends spend on their snacks? How much did the 5 friends spend on their tickets? We have to add those things together to get our total for the money that they spent all together. So let's get started. The parentheses tell us which equations we'll be solving first, right? So because both of our multiplication equations are in parentheses, we'll be solving those before we add them together to get our total. So let's start there. We have 5 times $7. That is going to come out to be $35. And then we have 5 times 5, which is a square number, so we know that is going to be $25. And now we have all the information that we need to add up to get the total. So we will take $35 plus $25 and add them together. 5 plus 5 is 10, so that'll be a 0. And then 4 plus 2 is 6, so that'll be $60 all together. So our total is going to be $60. We have solved our equation using our distributive property, but our step 3 says to write out our complete answer. So if we are writing out our complete answer, then we need to be answering the question they originally asked us, which was, how much money did they spend all together? Our answer needs to reflect just that. How much money did they spend all together? when we are writing our complete answer, it has to fully answer the question that was originally asked. So your answer should look like, the student spent $60 altogether at the movies. And that answer is acceptable because it tells us the who, it tells us the how much, which was what they're asking us in the total. How much money did they spend altogether? We put who the they was, and we put how much money they spent. Great job on number 1. Let's move on to number 2.